My name is Frank Patterson. I'm 72 years old, and today I'm going to tell you the most extraordinary story I've ever lived. A story about loyalty, sacrifice, and the unconditional love of a four-legged companion who forever changed my life in the shadow of Lady Liberty. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss a single detail of this journey that will touch your soul. It all started 5 years ago when my life crumbled like a house of cards. But to understand this story, I need to go back much further to the steaming jungles of Vietnam in 1968, when I was just a scared 19-year-old kid from Buffalo, New York, fighting in a war that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I was what we called a tunnel rat, one of the soldiers small enough to crawl into the Viet Cong's underground tunnel systems with nothing but a flashlight, a .45 pistol, and nerves of steel. It was the most terrifying job in Vietnam, and that's saying something. Those tunnels were death traps, booby traps, poisonous snakes, enemy soldiers waiting in the dark, and the constant fear that you might never see daylight again. I remember like it was yesterday, the morning of March 15th, 1969, when our unit was tasked with clearing a massive tunnel complex near Cu Chi. I'd been in country for 8 months, had crawled through more holes than I could count, but something felt different about that mission. The air was thicker, the silence more menacing. 20 feet into the tunnel, I heard the unmistakable click of a tripwire. In that split second, I knew I was dead. But instead of an explosion, I heard frantic barking above ground. Sergeant, my unit's German Shepherd scout dog, had detected something the rest of us missed. A secondary entrance where VC soldiers were positioning for an ambush. That dog saved my life and the lives of 12 other soldiers that day. From that moment, I understood something profound about German Shepherds. They don't just serve, they sacrifice. They become part of your soul in ways that only another soldier can understand. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, earned a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, but came home in 1970 carrying invisible wounds that would take decades to understand. What they now call PTSD was just called being messed up back then. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the inability to connect with people who hadn't seen what we'd seen. If you're enjoying Frank's story, don't forget to like and share with those you care about. Still, I tried to build a normal life. Married my high school sweetheart Linda in 1972, a sweet girl from Niagara Falls who thought love could heal anything. We had 2 beautiful children, Michael and Susan. I worked for 30 years as a maintenance supervisor at Buffalo General Hospital, always carrying my veteran status with quiet pride. Linda was my anchor. When the war nightmares woke me screaming at 3 a.m., she'd hold my hand and whisper, "Frank, you're home. The war is over." She knew exactly what to say to bring me back from those jungle tunnels to our warm bedroom in suburban Buffalo. Our kids grew up hearing sanitized versions of my war stories, never the real horror, just tales of brotherhood and courage. I told them about the dogs we worked with, how they could smell danger before humans even sensed it, how they'd give their lives without hesitation for their handlers. The years passed like autumn leaves. Michael became a teacher and moved to Seattle. Susan married and relocated to Florida with her Navy husband. The house that once echoed with children's laughter grew quieter, but Linda and I were content in our quiet twilight years. Until that cursed Tuesday in March 2019, Linda, Michael and Susan had gone to lunch together. A rare occasion since Mike was visiting from the West Coast. I stayed home with a nasty flu that had knocked me down for days. "I'll bring you back some soup," were the last words Linda said as she kissed my forehead before leaving. They never came back. The accident happened on Interstate 90. A semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed the median into oncoming traffic. The impact killed all 3 instantly: my wife of 47 years, my son, my daughter. In one horrific moment, I lost everything that mattered in my life. The months that followed were darker than anything I'd experienced in Vietnam. Worse than crawling through those death tunnels, worse than dodging sniper fire, worse than watching young soldiers die in rice paddies. Because in war, at least we had hope of going home. Now home was just an empty shell of memories. I sold the house in Buffalo, couldn't bear to live surrounded by ghosts, moved to a small apartment in Queens, but the loneliness was suffocating. At 69 years old, I found myself completely alone in the world, carrying only the fragments of a life that seemed to have ended with theirs. That's when the opportunity at Liberty Island presented itself. Through a buddy from my VFW post who knew someone in the National Park Service, I heard they needed a night security guard for the Statue of Liberty. "Frank," he told me, "it's solitary work. 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. You'd be alone on the island most nights. There's a small security station where you can stay between rounds." For me, it sounded perfect. Complete isolation, one of the most meaningful monuments in America, and honest work watching over Lady Liberty herself. I took the job without hesitation. The security station is located near the base of the statue, hidden from tourist areas. It's modest. One room, kitchenette, small bathroom, and a window facing New York Harbor. From that window, I could see the Manhattan skyline, the Verrazano Bridge, and the constant dance of ferries and ships in the harbor. My routine became monastic. Every evening at 6 p.m., when the last tourist ferry departed for Battery Park, I began my solitary watch. I'd patrol the island's perimeter, check the statue's base for any damage or security issues, then return to the station for paperwork and monitoring. The silence out there is absolute except for the wind off the harbor and the distant sounds of New York City. For someone who'd spent a lifetime surrounded by hospital noise in Buffalo, that quietude was both comforting and haunting. During my off hours, I'd walk the island's pathways, knowing every inch of the 12-acre landmass. I'd read about the statue's history, about the French sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, about the millions of immigrants who saw her torch as their first glimpse of American freedom. It was during one of these walks exactly 3 years ago that my life changed forever. I was making my evening rounds when I heard weak barking coming from near the old military fortifications on the island's south side. It was the sound of an animal in distress, and my old soldier instincts kicked in, always help a brother in need. Following the sound, I found him in a small depression between the stone walls. He was a magnificent German shepherd, but in terrible condition. Severely underweight, matted fur, an infected wound on his left rear leg, obviously abandoned for days or weeks. When he saw me, he didn't run, just looked at me with those intelligent brown eyes, as if to say, "Please, help me." Ironically, finding a German shepherd brought immediate flashbacks to Vietnam. These dogs had been our lifelines in the jungle, our early warning systems against ambush. But here, injured and abandoned, he was just an animal needing help. "Easy, boy," I said softly, approaching slowly. "Nobody's going to hurt you." He offered no resistance as I lifted him. He weighed far less than he should have, clearly malnourished. I carried him back to the security station and did what I could with the first aid kit I'd kept stocked since my army days. "You're going to be called Duke," I told him while cleaning his wound. "That's a name for a fighter, and you look like you fought some battles. If you're moved by this beginning, stay with us, because what comes next will touch your hearts even more." That first night, Duke slept on the floor beside my cot. When I woke at 3 a.m. from my usual Vietnam nightmare, the one where I'm trapped in a tunnel with no way out, he was watching me, as if standing guard. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel completely alone. Over the next few days, Duke recovered quickly. He was intelligent and grateful. He understood I'd saved him and repaid it with a devotion I hadn't felt since my family died. During my patrols, he walked beside me like a shadow. During my rest periods, he lay at my feet like a faithful sentinel. I discovered he'd been excellently trained. He responded to basic commands, walked at heel without a leash, never wandered far from my side. Someone had invested time and love in his training before cruelly abandoning him. But Duke was more than just a companion animal. He seemed to understand my pain, my loneliness, my haunted past. When the Vietnam nightmares jolted me awake, he'd climb onto my cot and lie against me until the trembling stopped. When grief over my family's loss overwhelmed me, he'd rest his head in my lap, as if saying, "I'm here." It was like fate had sent this companion to help me through the darkest period of my life. A German dog whose loyalty, instead of being my enemy from war, became my closest friend in peace. But our real test of partnership was still coming. And it would be that test that showed me the true meaning of unconditional loyalty. The first few months with Duke were undoubtedly the happiest I'd had since the family tragedy. He transformed my solitary routine into a comfortable companionship. During my nightly patrols around the Statue of Liberty, Duke walked silently beside me, his paws making soft sounds on the stone pathways as we inspected every corner of Liberty Island. Our routine was simple but comforting. At 6 p.m., when the last tourist ferry departed for Battery Park, my shift began. Duke would already be waiting at the security station door, as if he knew exactly what time it was. We'd make our first round together, me with my flashlight, him with his keen German shepherd senses, always alert. If you're following our emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chapters. The view from the island still moved me every night. The lights of Manhattan twinkled like earthbound stars. New York Harbor reflected the city's glow, and the Brooklyn Bridge stood majestically in the distance. Duke seemed to appreciate it too. I'd often find him at the island's edge, looking toward the city like a true guardian. During those first 6 months, everything went smoothly. My security guard salary was modest, about $3,200 per month, but sufficient for both of us. I bought quality dog food for Duke, kept the station's small refrigerator stocked, and even had enough left over for some extras. Duke adapted perfectly to island life. During the day, while I slept a few hours, he'd explore the walking paths around Liberty Island. He always returned before I woke, as if he had a perfect internal clock. At night, he was my faithful companion on rounds, always alert for anything unusual. But life has those cruel turns that test our resilience. Everything changed in September 2021 when the National Park Service underwent budget restructuring. Tourism was down due to the pandemic, revenues had plummeted, and spending cuts were inevitable. My salary was reduced to $2,100 monthly, an amount that barely covered my basic needs, let alone Duke's as well. "Frank," said the administrative supervisor when he delivered the news, "it's temporary. Once tourism normalizes, we'll restore full salaries. But for now, it's this or nothing." I accepted, of course. At 71 years old, without family, without other options, what choice did I have? But that reduction meant I'd have to make difficult choices between my food and Duke's food. Initially, I tried to keep everything normal. I cut personal expenses, bought only basics at the grocery store, eliminated anything unnecessary. But Duke's quality dog food cost $75 for a 30-pound bag, and with $2,100 in salary, that represented a significant portion of my income. If this story of loyalty is touching you, leave a like and share with those who need to hear about unconditional love. That's when I started noticing something extraordinary about Duke. As if he understood our financial situation, he began eating less. I'd fill his food bowl in the morning, and when I returned at night, food would still be left. Initially, I thought he might be sick. "Duke, you feeling okay, boy?" I'd ask worriedly, examining his eyes, his nose, looking for signs of illness. But he seemed healthy. He was just consciously consuming less food. After observing for several days, I understood what was happening. Duke had noticed I was eating less, opening fewer cans, that my plates were emptier. And with that canine intelligence that sometimes surpasses human understanding, he decided he should also economize. It was heartbreaking to see my companion voluntarily depriving himself of food to help me. I tried to force him to eat more, but he was stubborn. He'd only eat enough to maintain the strength needed for his co-guard duties at Liberty Island. The situation worsened when December 2021 arrived. New York had one of the most intense winter storm seasons I'd ever witnessed. For 2 straight weeks, nor'easters pummeled the city with frightening fury. Out on Liberty Island, we were in the direct path of these storms. Wind howled around the statue with a force that made the security station itself tremble. Rain and sleet came from all directions, penetrating cracks I didn't know existed. During night patrols, Duke and I would be soaked within minutes. The constant moisture ruined much of the food supplies I'd stockpiled. Bread molded, some canned goods rusted, fruit rotted prematurely. In 3 days, I lost nearly half my food supply. Duke, who was already eating little, began eating even less. There were nights when I saw him pushing his kibble toward me, as if wanting me to eat it too. It was such a human gesture, so caring, that I couldn't hold back tears. "Duke, my friend," I'd say, stroking his head wet from the rain. "You don't need to sacrifice for me. We're a team. We share everything." But he continued with that determined look, as if saying, "We're in this together, soldier." The worst night was a Thursday in December. The storm was so violent we couldn't make our usual patrol. Leaving the station meant real risk of accidents. We were trapped for over 12 hours, listening to the wind screaming outside like a wounded animal. Our food had run out the day before. I had only a package of saltines and a can of tuna fish that was 2 months past expiration, found at the bottom of the storage cabinet. It was all we had until I could get to Staten Island for supplies. I split the crackers with Duke, half for me, half for him. I opened the questionable tuna, smelled it to make sure it wasn't spoiled, and divided that too. Duke ate his portion without complaint, but I noticed he always left the biggest pieces of fish on my side of the plate. That night, lying on the small couch in the station, with Duke warming my feet as he always did, I looked at this extraordinary animal and felt a gratitude I couldn't express in words. Here was a dog who could easily swim to Manhattan, find a family who'd feed him well, give him comfort. But he chose to stay with me, a 71-year-old man in a drafty station, sharing stale crackers and expired tuna. It was loyalty in its purest form. When the storm finally passed and we could get to Staten Island for supplies, I made sure to use part of my emergency money to buy a bag of the best dog food I could find. Duke deserved a proper meal after days of deprivation. But our ordeal wasn't over yet. Summer 2022 brought new challenges that would test our partnership even further. And it was during those months that I discovered the true meaning of the word fidelity. The heat wave of July 2022 hit New York with unprecedented intensity. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees for days, and out on Liberty Island, without the protection of city buildings, the sun beat down mercilessly on our small station. At night, when my shift began, heat still radiated from the stone pathways, turning my patrol into a physical ordeal. Duke suffered even more than I did. His thick German shepherd coat wasn't designed for this brutal heat. During afternoons, I'd find him sprawled on the station floor, panting desperately, seeking any coolness on the concrete. I'd soak towels in cold water and drape them over him to ease his suffering. It was during one of those scorching afternoons that I received news that would change everything again. The administrative supervisor came out to Liberty Island for a conversation I already knew wouldn't be good. "Frank," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, "the service has decided to install an electronic security system. Motion sensor cameras, automatic alarms, remote monitoring. They need to reduce the night guard staff." My heart pounded. "And me? For now you stay because of your experience and knowledge of the site, but it'll be part-time, just midnight to 6 a.m. Salary goes to $200 monthly. $1,200. It was less than half what I'd originally earned, and a third of what had already been reduced. With that amount, it would be impossible to maintain Duke and myself with dignity. That night, sitting on the edge of Liberty Island with Duke beside me, looking at the lights of Manhattan, I made the most difficult decision of my life since losing my family. "Duke," I said, scratching behind his ears the way he liked, Maybe it's time for you to find a new family, one that can give you food every day, a cool place to sleep, veterinary care when you need it. He looked at me with those intelligent brown eyes, tilted his head to the side, as he always did when he didn't understand something I said, and simply laid his head in my lap, as if saying, "I'm not going anywhere, old man. Stay with us because the next chapter will show the moment you're waiting for, the ultimate test of loyalty." Summer 2022 arrived with an intensity I didn't expect. After decades living in New York, I thought I knew all the moods of the climate. But that August was particularly brutal for anyone living on Liberty Island. Daytime temperatures easily reached 105 degrees, and out on the island, without the protection of city buildings, the sun beat down mercilessly on our small security station. At night, when my shift began, heat still radiated from the stone pathways, turning my patrol into a true physical ordeal. Duke suffered even more than I did. His thick German shepherd coat wasn't made for New York's brutal heat. During afternoons, I'd find him stretched on the station floor, panting, desperately seeking some coolness on the concrete floor. I'd wet towels with cold water and place them over him to ease his suffering. If you're following this journey of companionship, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe for more stories that touch the soul. It was on one of those sweltering afternoons that I received news that would change everything again. The administrative supervisor came out to Liberty Island for a conversation I already knew wouldn't be good. "Frank," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, "the service has decided to install a full electronic security system. Motion cameras, automatic alarms, remote monitoring. They're going to need to reduce the night guard staff." My heart raced. "And me, for now you stay, because of your experience and knowledge of the location. But it'll be part-time only, just midnight to 6 a.m. Salary drops to $1,200 monthly. $1,200. It was less than half what I'd originally earned, and a third of what had already been cut. With that amount, it would be impossible to maintain Duke and myself with dignity." That night, sitting on the edge of Liberty Island with Duke at my side, looking at the lights of Manhattan, I made the most difficult decision of my life since losing my family. "Duke," I said, scratching behind his ears the way he liked, "maybe it's time for you to find a new family, one that can give you food every day, a cool place to sleep, veterinary care when you need it." He looked at me with those intelligent brown eyes, tilted his head to the side, as he always did when he didn't understand something I said, and simply placed his head in my lap, as if saying, "I'm not going anywhere, old man." Over the following days, I subtly tried to distance him. When he followed me on patrols, I'd say, "Stay, Duke, stay at the station." When he came to keep me company during our meager meals, I pretended to be less receptive. It was a desperate attempt to protect him from myself, to force myself to do what I thought was right for him. But Duke was more stubborn than a New York City pigeon. The more I tried to push him away, the more attached he became. If I didn't take him on patrol, he'd follow anyway, maintaining a respectful distance but never losing sight of me. If I ate alone, he'd sit beside me without asking for anything, just keeping me company. Life was testing our friendship in every possible way. Then came September 2022, bringing the most violent storm we'd ever faced together. The National Weather Service had issued warnings for the entire New York metropolitan area, but out on Liberty Island, we always thought we were strong enough to handle anything. We were wrong. The storm began on a Tuesday afternoon. Initially, it seemed like just another late summer storm, the kind that cools the air and gives relief from the heat. But within hours, it transformed into a true hurricane. The wind blew with a force I'd never experienced, not even during the worst monsoons in Vietnam. Rain didn't fall. It was hurled horizontally by the wind, piercing any protection we tried to erect. The noise was deafening, wind howling, rain hitting like machine guns, thunder that made the entire island shake. Around 9 p.m., when my shift was beginning, I realized it wouldn't be possible to make any external patrol. Leaving the station in those conditions would be suicide. Duke seemed to agree. He was restless, pacing back and forth in the small station, clearly disturbed by the storm's violence. At 10:30 p.m. the power went out. We were in total darkness, with only the light from my emergency flashlight. The sound of wind became even more terrifying without the distraction of electric lights. It was like being back in a bunker under German artillery fire. Duke came to lie beside me on the couch, shaking, not from cold, but from anxiety. I put my arm around him and whispered, "Easy, boy. I've been through worse than this. We'll be fine." But my confidence was shaken when I heard a deafening crash from outside. It was the sound of something very large breaking apart. In the morning we'd discovered that a century-old tree had fallen just yards from the station. The worst part came in the early morning hours. Around 3 a.m., I began to notice that the station floor was getting wet. At first, I thought it was just rain coming through window cracks, but within minutes I realized the terrible truth. The roof was giving way. Water began to drip, then pour, then gush from multiple points. In 20 minutes, our small station had become practically a swimming pool. Everything we had got soaked: clothes, food, equipment, documents. If you're feeling the tension of this storm, imagine what it was like to live through it. Leave your like to give strength to this incredible story. Duke and I took refuge in one corner that still offered some protection, huddled under a blanket that soon became soaked. He trembled against my body, and I held him tight, trying to project confidence I barely felt. "It's just a storm, Duke," I repeated like a mantra. "I faced Viet Cong soldiers. I can face a little rain." But inside, I was terrified. At 72 years old, wet, cold, without dry food, in a collapsing station, I began to wonder if this wasn't where our story would end. That's when Duke did something that marked me forever. Even trembling, even soaked, even clearly frightened, he got up and went to the corner of the station where I kept my emergency backpack, the one every veteran maintains, always ready. He grabbed the handle with his teeth and dragged it to where we were sheltering. Inside the backpack was my last reserve: 2 energy bars and a bottle of water, our emergency ration for extreme situations. Duke knew where it was and went to get it for both of us. In that moment, soaked and afraid, looking at that dog who continued thinking about our survival even in the worst conditions, I understood something. Duke wasn't just my companion. He was my brother in arms. The storm lasted until Thursday dawn. When it finally stopped, we emerged from the station to assess the damage. The scene was one of devastation: fallen trees, destroyed pathways, even the statue itself had suffered minor damage to its base. Our station was uninhabitable. The roof had collapsed in several places. The floor was covered with mud and debris. Our few belongings were destroyed. We had no more dry food, clean clothes, or decent shelter. I sat on a rock, looking at that disaster, and for the first time since the war, I felt truly defeated. At 72 years old, without money, without a home, without prospects, Duke approached, still dripping rainwater, and did something simple but powerful. He laid his head on my knee and stayed there. He didn't try to console me with play or licks. He just stayed with me, sharing the weight of that moment. It was in moments like these that I understood why dogs are considered man's best friend. But our greatest test of endurance was still to come, and it would be that test that would define whether our partnership could withstand everything fate still had in store for us. After the devastating storm, Duke and I spent 3 days sleeping in the open, sheltered only by a tarp borrowed from the Liberty Island maintenance crew. It was a temporary situation while they assessed the damage and decided whether it was worth rebuilding the guard station or simply implementing the full electronic system. During those 3 days, we survived on donations from the monument staff. Sandwiches that workers brought from home, bottled water, some cans of dog food they got from the nearest pet store. Duke accepted everything with the same silent dignity as always, but I could see he was watching me more closely, as if afraid I might disappear at any moment. On Thursday morning, the supervisor came to give me the final news. "Frank, We've decided not to rebuild the station. The electronic system will be installed next week. Unfortunately, there won't be any more need for a night guard. Your last day is Sunday." Those words hit me like enemy mortar fire. At 72 years old, after losing my family, my home, and now my job, I found myself completely lost. I had no source of income left, no place to live, no prospects. I sat on a rock beside Duke and told him the truth that was tearing me apart inside. "My friend, the time has come. You need to find a real family, one that can give you a worthy life." Duke looked at me with that intelligent expression, as if he understood every word. Then he did something that broke my heart. He lay down on the ground at my feet and simply stayed there, as if saying, "I choose to stay with you, whatever happens." If you're moved by this demonstration of loyalty, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this need to be shared. Over the following days, I tried everything to find Duke a new home. I talked to Park Service staff, asked tourists, even put up a makeshift sign at the ferry dock. "Well-trained, gentle dog seeks loving family." Several people showed interest. A wealthy family from Upper East Side said they could take him, but when they saw Duke at my side, they commented, "He seems very attached to you. Maybe it's better to wait until he gets used to the idea." A young couple from Brooklyn also expressed interest. They had a large apartment, a yard, excellent conditions. But when they came to meet Duke, he simply hid behind me and refused to interact with them. "That's strange," the woman said. "Usually abandoned dogs are more receptive to people who can help them." I knew what was happening. Duke wasn't abandoned. He had chosen to stay with me, even knowing it meant a difficult life. Sunday arrived, my last day of work. That morning I made my final patrol around Liberty Island, with Duke walking silently beside me. It felt like both of us knew this was our goodbye to the place that had been our home for 3 years. At 6 p.m., I turned in the keys to the damaged station and my official flashlight. The supervisor gave me my final paycheck. Only $400 for the half-month worked. It was all I had in the world. "Frank," he said with genuine concern, "are you sure you'll be okay? I could try talking to administration, see if they can arrange some kind of special pension." "Thank you," I replied. "But don't worry, I'm a war veteran. I've been through worse things." But inside I was terrified. At 72 years old, with $400 in my pocket, no home, no job, no family, and worse, with a magnificent dog who refused to abandon me, even when that would be best for him. That first night, we slept in a park in Brooklyn. I'd bought a cheap sleeping bag and a rope to tie Duke up, in case he tried to run away during the night looking for food somewhere better. But Duke made no attempt to escape. On the contrary, he spent the entire night awake, lying beside me, standing guard. Every so often I'd open my eyes and see him there, alert, protecting my sleep. From that moment, our true survival journey began. With the $400, I bought dog food that would last Duke a week, some canned food for myself, and a gallon of water. I knew the money wouldn't last long, so I needed to quickly find a way to survive. We began wandering the streets of New York. During the day, I looked for temporary work, helping with moves, carrying groceries, cleaning yards. Duke always waited patiently in the shade, never straying more than a few feet from me. At night, we slept wherever we could. Parks, store awnings, abandoned bus stops. Duke adapted to street life with a naturalness that impressed me. It was as if he understood we were a team facing adversity together. What touched me most was seeing how he shared everything with me, even when there was almost nothing to share. If I managed to get just one meal from a restaurant that took pity on us, Duke would wait for me to eat first. If we found water at a public fountain, he'd drink only after I quenched my thirst. Can you imagine the emotion of having a companion like this? Leave your like if you also have a loyal friend like Duke. 1 week after leaving Liberty Island, something happened that tested our partnership definitively. We were at Grand Central Station, looking for some temporary loading work, when a well-dressed man approached. It was Dr. Williams, a retired veterinarian who was passing by and noticed Duke. What a beautiful German shepherd! he said, crouching down to examine Duke more closely. From his build and characteristics, he must be purebred. Where did you get him? I briefly explained our situation, that Duke had been abandoned, that we'd become companions, that we were facing difficulties. Dr. Williams listened attentively and then made a proposal that left me speechless. Mr. Patterson, I know a family in Westchester County that's looking for exactly a dog like this. They're excellent people, own a large estate, have other animals. They could pay up to $8,000 for a German Shepherd of this quality. $8,000. It was more money than I'd see in months of sporadic work, enough to stabilize myself, rent a small room, feed myself decently for several months. You could come with me now, Dr. Williams continued. I have my car here. In 2 hours we'd be there, make the deal, and you'd return with the money. I looked at Duke, who was sitting beside me, observing the conversation. Those brown eyes looked at me with the absolute trust of someone who had never doubted his companion's loyalty. This was the moment of truth. I could accept the offer, guarantee an excellent future for Duke and money for my survival, or I could refuse and continue our uncertain journey through New York streets. Dr. Williams, I said finally, I thank you very much for your offer, but Duke isn't for sale. We're a family. The veterinarian looked at me with an expression of surprise and respect. I understand, but if you change your mind, here's my card. When he walked away, I knelt beside Duke and held his head in my hands. My friend, I hope you understand the choice I made. Maybe it wasn't the most sensible, but it was the most honest. Duke looked into my eyes and did something simple, but that meant everything. He licked my hand once as if saying, "Thank you for not abandoning me." If you're getting emotional about this incredible partnership, share this story with your friends. True love needs to be celebrated. That night, sleeping under an awning in Times Square, with Duke warming my feet as he always did, I reflected on the decision I'd made. Maybe in the world's eyes, I was a crazy old man who'd rejected $8,000 because of a dog. But I knew the truth. Duke wasn't just a dog. He was my brother in arms, my battle companion, my family. And true families don't sell each other for any amount of money. What I didn't know was that our mutual loyalty was about to be rewarded in a way I never imagined. Sometimes the universe has mysterious ways of honoring those who make the right choices for the right reasons. Our real adventure was just beginning. 3 weeks living on New York streets taught me things that 2 tours in Vietnam hadn't managed to. The main one was that human dignity doesn't depend on where you sleep, but on how you treat those who are by your side. Duke and I developed an almost military survival routine. We'd wake before dawn, when the streets were still empty and we could wash at public fountains without bothering anyone. He'd wait patiently while I did my basic hygiene, then refresh himself in the same water. Our feeding strategy was simple. I'd look for temporary work during the day, while Duke stayed in a safe shade waiting. With the few dollars I managed to earn, between $20 and $35 per day when there was work, I'd buy his food first, then mine. If you're following our journey of resistance, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stories of overcoming like this deserve to be shared. The most incredible thing was observing how Duke had developed a survival intelligence that impressed me. He could distinguish dangerous people from kind people just by their way of walking. When someone approached with bad intentions, he'd discreetly position himself between me and the person. When they were good-hearted people, he'd stay relaxed, sometimes even wag his tail. It was on a Tuesday in April that our luck began to change. We were in Central Park, where I'd gotten half a day's work helping with a move, when an elegant lady about 65 years old approached. Duke, following his infallible instinct, stayed calm, a sign she represented no danger. "Excuse me," she said with what sounded like a southern accent. "Are you the gentleman and dog who've been sleeping in the park?" I became wary. Maybe it was some complaint. Maybe someone had called the city to remove us. "Yes, ma'am. But we don't cause problems. We always clean up our area." "No, no," she interrupted with a smile. "On the contrary, my name is Mrs. Eleanor. I own a boarding house in Greenwich Village. I've been observing you both for several days, and I've been impressed by the affection you show for each other." Duke approached her slowly, with that respectful caution he always showed with older people. Mrs. Eleanor extended her hand, and he smelled it delicately before allowing a pet. "What a well-mannered dog," she commented. "May I know your ages?" "I'm 72, ma'am. Duke is about 5 or 6 years old." "And how did you end up on the street?" I told our story briefly. The loss of family, the job at Liberty Island, the storm, our period on the streets. She listened attentively, asking pointed questions that showed genuine interest. When I finished, Mrs. Eleanor was silent for several moments, looking at both of us. Then she said something that would change our lives. "Mr. Patterson, I have a proposition. My boarding house has a small caretaker apartment that's been vacant for months. It's simple. 1 room, bathroom, kitchenette. In exchange for housing, you could help with small repairs, gardening, guest reception." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're being serious?" "Completely. And Duke would be welcome too. I have a large backyard where he could be comfortable." This offer came like a miracle. If you believe there are angels on earth, leave your like on this incredible story. I looked at Duke, who seemed to understand the importance of that moment. His eyes shone with an expression I interpreted as hope. "Mrs. Eleanor, I accept, but I should warn you, I don't have money for a deposit, no references." "Mr. Patterson," she said firmly, "your references are right here beside you. A man who rejects $8,000 not to abandon his companion is someone I can trust completely." How did she know about Dr. Williams's offer? Apparently some stories travel faster than we imagine. Mrs. Eleanor's boarding house was located on a tree-lined street in Greenwich Village, in a yellow colonial house of 3 stories. The caretaker apartment was in the back, independent, with its own entrance. It was small, but clean and airy, a palace compared to the places we'd slept in recent weeks. "The payment is symbolic," Mrs. Eleanor explained. $600 monthly, discounted from what I'd pay a professional caretaker. The rest is your housing." Duke explored our new home with curiosity, smelling every corner, familiarizing himself with the space. When he reached the backyard, a green space of about 2,000 square feet with fruit trees, his tail wouldn't stop wagging. "He likes it," Mrs. Eleanor observed. "And look, there's a hose here. On hot mornings, you both can cool off as much as you want." Our first night in a real home after almost a month on the street was emotional. Duke slept on the floor beside the bed, as always, but I could see he was more relaxed. He didn't stay awake standing guard like he did on the streets. Life at the boarding house brought a normalcy I'd forgotten existed. My duties were simple: water the garden in the morning, make small repairs when necessary, receive guests in Mrs. Eleanor's absence. Duke quickly became the boarding house's official mascot. All the guests wanted to take photos with the most well-behaved dog in New York. After 2 months in this peaceful routine, I discovered something about Mrs. Eleanor that explained her generosity. During an afternoon coffee conversation, she told me her story. "Mr. Patterson, I lost my husband 5 years ago. He was a retired Air Force officer, like you're a veteran. In his final years, his only faithful companion was a mixed-breed dog named Captain. When my husband died, Captain went into deep depression. He died 3 months later, as if he couldn't live without his commander." She paused, looking at Duke, who was sleeping peacefully in the shade. "When I saw you both in the park, I immediately remembered them. The same loyalty, the same companionship. I knew I needed to help. If you're getting emotional about this chain of kindness, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this restore our faith in humanity." The following months were the most peaceful I'd had since my family's death. Duke gained weight, his coat regained its shine, and he developed his own routine at the boarding house. In the morning, he'd make his security rounds of the garden. In the afternoon, he'd receive affection from guests. At night, he'd accompany me on small maintenance tasks, but what impressed me most was seeing how he'd return to playing. On the streets, Duke was always serious, focused on survival. At the boarding house, I discovered him playing alone with sticks that fell from trees, chasing butterflies, even trying to hunt the squirrels that visited the yard. One afternoon, while I was pruning the rose bushes, Duke began barking in a strange way. It wasn't an alert bark, nor a playful one. It was a bark. Happy? I looked up and saw something extraordinary. At the boarding house gate stood a man about 60 years old, in an impeccable military uniform, accompanied by 2 other officers. Duke had recognized something in them that took me a few seconds to perceive. They were veterans like me. "Are you Frank Patterson?" asked the highest-ranking officer. "Yes, sir. Colonel Henry Martinez from the Vietnam Veterans Association. May we talk?" What followed was one of the most emotional conversations of my life. Apparently, our story had reached the Veterans Association through Mrs. Eleanor, who knew people connected to the military. They were coming to offer me something I thought impossible: official recognition for my service in Vietnam. "Frank," said Colonel Martinez, "your military file got lost somewhere in post-war bureaucracy, but we've managed to reconstruct your record. You're entitled to a special veteran's pension, retroactive to 5 years. I couldn't immediately process what he was saying. Pension, $2,400 monthly, plus special medical benefits. And more, the association wants to invite you to be our memory ambassador, visit schools, tell your war experience to new generations. Duke, who had been quiet during the entire conversation, approached and placed his head on my knee, as he did whenever he sensed I was emotional. Can you imagine the emotion of having a lifetime of service finally recognized? Leave your like if you believe it's never too late for justice. That night, alone in the apartment with Duke, I reflected on the incredible sequence of events that had brought us there. From loneliness at Liberty Island to life on the streets, from Mrs. Eleanor's generosity to military recognition, everything seemed to have been orchestrated by a greater force. "Duke," I said while petting him, "did you know everything was going to work out? Is that why you never abandoned me, even when everything seemed lost?" He looked at me with those wise eyes and wagged his tail slowly, as if saying, "I knew that together we were stronger." With financial stability guaranteed, I could finally give Duke everything he deserved: premium food, regular veterinary checkups, toys, even an orthopedic bed for his joints that were beginning to feel the weight of age. But the most important thing I'd already given him from day one: unconditional love and the certainty that he'd never be abandoned. Our story, however, still reserved one last lesson about the true meaning of loyalty. 2 years passed since Duke and I found our stability at Mrs. Eleanor's boarding house. During that time, our routine transformed into a harmonious dance of companionship that only years can create between a man and his best friend. As memory ambassador for the Vietnam Veterans Association, I visited elementary and high schools throughout New York, telling my war experience to children and teenagers born into a free world thanks to our generation's sacrifice. Duke always accompanied me on these visits and quickly became part of the presentation. "This is Duke," I'd tell the attentive students, "my battle companion here in America. He taught me that true courage isn't about facing armed enemies, but about never abandoning those we love, even when life gets difficult." The children were fascinated by Duke. He seemed to understand his educational role. He'd always stay calm, allow everyone to pet him, sometimes even act out situations I described, as if he knew exactly when to play sentinel or protective companion. If you're moved seeing how Duke became a true educator, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Stories that inspire generations deserve to be shared. During one of these talks, at a school in Brooklyn, something happened that changed my perspective on our life's purpose. A girl about 10 years old raised her hand and asked, "Mr. Frank, do you think Duke knew he was going to become famous when he decided not to abandon you?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Oh, my mom said you're famous on the internet. There are videos about you on YouTube, photos on Instagram. Duke is a celebrity." I didn't know this. Mrs. Eleanor had mentioned that some guests recognized our story, but I didn't imagine it had spread so much. That night, I asked her to show me. On her phone, I saw dozens of videos and photos of us, some taken discreetly during our walks, others during school presentations. The comments were moving. People from all over America and even other countries saying our story had inspired acts of kindness, pet adoptions, care for the elderly. "Frank," said Mrs. Eleanor, "you're not just a beautiful story. You're a symbol of hope for many people going through difficulties." Duke, who was lying at my feet, raised his head as if he knew we were talking about him. At 8 years old, he already showed some signs of aging, grey hairs on his muzzle, slightly slower movements in the morning, but his eyes continued with that brilliant intelligence as always. That's when I decided to do something I'd been thinking about for months: write our complete story. With help from a young journalist I met at one of the presentations, I began documenting not just our journey, but also the lessons Duke taught me about loyalty, resilience, and unconditional love. The book, which we decided to call Duke, My Brother-in-Arms, took 8 months to complete. During this period, several publishers showed interest, but I chose a small New York publisher that committed to donating part of the profits to organizations protecting abandoned animals. If you want stories like this to reach more people, leave your like and share. Literature that touches hearts needs to be promoted. The book launch was at a bookstore in Greenwich Village on a Saturday in December 2023. I was nervous. I'd never participated in a literary event, but Duke, as always, was calm beside me, transmitting that security only true companions can give. The bookstore was packed. People of all ages came, many accompanied by their own dogs. During the conversation with the audience, a lady about 75 stood up and said, "Mr. Frank, I lost my husband last year and became very depressed. When I read your story online, I decided to adopt an elderly female dog nobody wanted. Today, she's my reason to live. Thank you for teaching us. It's never too late to start over." Another person said our story inspired her to reconcile with a brother she hadn't spoken to in years. A young man said he decided to take better care of his grandfather after reading about our friendship. That's when I completely understood. Duke and I weren't just two survivors who found each other. We were instruments of a greater message about the importance of true bonds in an increasingly individualistic society. In the months that followed, we received invitations to television programs, podcasts, even for a documentary an independent production company wanted to make about our story. But we maintained our simple routine: presentations at schools, our daily walks through Central Park, our peaceful afternoons in the boarding house yard. The year 2024 brought a change I knew would eventually come. Duke began showing more signs of age: arthritis in his rear paws, faster fatigue during walks, more frequent veterinary consultations. Dr. Rodriguez, the veterinarian who began caring for Duke, was honest with me. "Frank, he's 9 years old, which for a German Shepherd is already advanced age. There's nothing specifically wrong, just natural wear. With proper care, we still have some good years ahead." Some years. For the first time since we found each other, I had to face the reality that our partnership wouldn't be eternal. But, as Duke taught me so many times, what's important isn't how much time we have, but how we use that time. I began modifying our routine to make it more comfortable for him. Shorter but more frequent walks, softer orthopedic bed, special food for senior dogs, heater in the room during colder days. Duke accepted all this care with the same dignity as always, but I could see he also knew time was passing. There was a different serenity in his eyes, as if he were at peace with the life we'd had together. If you have pets, enjoy every moment. Leave your like if you also know the value of each day beside those we love. One morning in May 2024, while we were having breakfast in the yard, he with his special food, me with bread and coffee, Duke did something that surprised me. He got up slowly, came to my chair, and for the first time in years put his front paws in my lap. He looked into my eyes with that expression I knew so well, tilted his head to the side, and made a soft sound. It wasn't barking, it wasn't whimpering, it was almost like he was trying to talk. "What is it, my friend?" I asked, stroking his head. He lay down at my feet, sighed deeply and stayed there, enjoying the morning sun. That's when I understood. He was thanking me. Thanking me for not abandoning him, for building this life together, for all the moments we shared. "I'm the one who thanks you, Duke," I whispered. "You saved me more times than you can imagine." Today, as I write these final lines, Duke is lying beside me, sleeping peacefully in the yard's sun. He's 10 years old now, increasingly grey fur, more careful movements, but the same loyal look as always. Our book became a bestseller. Our presentations continue packed. Messages of affection arrive daily from around the world. But what I'm most proud of isn't fame or recognition. It's knowing our story proves something fundamental, that true love knows no species, ages, or circumstances. Duke taught me that fidelity is a choice made every day. When he could have abandoned me to live a more comfortable life, he chose to stay. When I could have sold him to guarantee my survival, I chose to keep him by my side. If our story touched you, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Keep spreading messages of love and loyalty throughout the world. For all who are watching, I remind you that life's true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in the bonds we build. Duke and I were two orphans who found each other at the right moment. He, abandoned in a fortress, me, abandoned by life. Together, we discovered that we're never truly alone when we have someone willing to share both difficulties and joys. This is our legacy, that in every school where I speak, each child learns about loyalty, that in every copy of our book sold, a family reflects on their bonds, that in every video shared, someone decides not to give up on those they love. Duke made me understand that being someone's guardian isn't just protecting them from danger, but being present in difficult moments, celebrating in good moments, and never ever abandoning. At 75 years old, I can say I've lived a complete life. I served my country in war, built a family, worked with dignity, and in my final years found the most loyal companion a man can have. Thank you for following our journey. May Duke's story inspire you never to give up on those you love, because true love always finds a way to win.